Part of my talk here today is to actually give you the heads up on how to actually go out and catch one of the species that are located within the waters of Victoria. And those species can be a brown trout. So brown trout are pretty easily distinguishable obviously by the colour, but they also do not have spots on the tail. Now rainbow trout, very, very distinctive with a pink line down their stomach. And the other one, which is a very sought after species, is redfin. And redfin, very easy to distinguish by their red fins themselves. Okay, so now we'll just run through some of the gear that you will need to enable you to head out and catch some of these species. Obviously, the first thing we'll need is to go actually and purchase a rod and reel. So you can head out to your local tackle shop, and first off we'll need a rod and reel. I suggest a rod, around about 2 metres long, and a nice size spinning reel. If you talk to your local tackle operator, they'll be able to give you the heads up on what you need to buy. Line, somewhere around about the 2 kilo mark. Very simple basic setup that we'll start with today. And what you'll need in your kit to start with is obviously a little tackle box, something like this. In the tackle box you'll need to purchase some hooks and some sinkers and some swivels. Now we'll focus on trying to catch a rainbow and brown trout first off, and some of the baits that we'll need to use to catch a rainbow or brown trout are power bait. Then we'll go through fishing mud-eye, and also we can then look at other forms of fishing, which is casting lures, soft plastics, and also fly fishing. So now we'll get to the nitty-gritty bit of bait fishing and the setup that you will need to head out and try and catch a rainbow or brown trout. And we'll use power bait as an example for our bait today. So what we need is we need a little sinker, we'll need a swivel, and we'll need a hook. So what we do is we attach our line to the swivel. We'll have our sinker above the swivel, and then a little bit of a leader, which can be about 2 foot long, to the hook. From there you can actually grab some power bait. Now power bait is sold in all stores, fishing tackle stores, and it comes in a variety of colours. So I've got pink here and also chartreuse, but it comes in heaps of different colours. I don't have one particular colour that's a favourite of mine because they all work in their own different times. So very, very easy and basic to put on your hook, but also very easy to keep, and you can take it trip after trip with it. So what we do is it comes in little pallet form, and all you do is you pop that and mould that around your hook, so the power bait is actually totally enclosed inside the hook, just like that. And from there we then cast our line out into the lake or the river that you're going to fish. And then once you've cast it out, you actually pop your rod on the rod holder. And one point that I stress when it comes to power bait fishing is that I don't wind my line up really, really tight. Because what power bait does in the water, it actually floats. So your sinker sits on the bottom and the power bait actually floats up. And what we want is for then the current, which is in the lake, can be made from the wind and all those sorts of things. The power bait will actually float around under the water. If we pull it really, really tight, you actually can drag it down into the weed and it doesn't sit around or float. So it's very restricted, and the trout has to basically come right up to it before it will actually eat it. So that's one very point that I would like to make to everyone: to do not have your line nice and tight. Okay, just let the bait float around. Okay, and then hopefully the trout comes along and then grabs it. So that's a very, very basic way of fishing, and it does catch lots and lots of fish. The other way you can do this is not using power bait is for bait you can actually grab a bunch of worms. same method. Just pop your worms on your hook, and then the or corn as well. That's another good bait to use for trout. And then just pop that out. And once again, I wouldn't have my line very, very tight. I'll just leave it nice and loose. And then when the trout bites, it actually gives it a little bit of free play, as you could say. Because what we want to do is have our bait as natural as possible, because a trout, if you think you're going to be a fish, you're going to eat something, you're going to come along and think, that's nice and natural, there's no restrictions or anything like that. We'll come along, we'll eat it, and then we'll swim off, and you'll see the bite, and then you actually hook it. So just a couple of pointers with that is just to make sure that you have a bit of loose line to make sure that that trout actually thinks it's natural food that it's going to eat. Okay, so the next method I'd like to move on to is to use mud-eye. Now mud-eye to me is one of my favourite forms of bait fishing when it comes to trout. And I have a slightly different setup when it comes to my gear that I actually use. So I've got a bit longer rod, somewhere around about that 3 metres. I use a little bit lighter line when it comes to fishing with a mud-eye. The line is somewhere around about the 2 kilo mark. And a couple other bits of different gear that I do use is I use a smaller hook. I won't say the size, but somewhere around about size 12 or 10. I use a small bit of split shot and also a bit of foam. Then from there I do have a bubble float. Now the bubble float is only to assist in the casting of your mud-eye. Now for those that don't know what a mud-eye is, this is what a mud-eye looks like. And they come in a couple of different forms. This one is called a cooter mud-eye, and then there's a smaller one which is called a bug mud-eye. And what these are the larvae stage of a dragonfly. So you can see dragonflies, especially in the warmer weather, flying around above the surface of the water, and mud-eyes are the larvae stage of what the dragonflies are. And trout love them. They certainly love them. And as I said, it's one of my favourite forms of fishing. So the rig or the setup that I use when I'm fishing a mud-eye is I have my bubble float. Now I don't put any water in this bubble float at all. I have a piece of foam, which I'll explain what the foam is used for in a second. I have a bit of split shot. The split shot is actually used for weight to actually make your mud-eye sink. Then I have the smaller hook, which has got my mud-eye on it. I'll grab my bit of foam just to explain how this works. So I've got my bit of foam, and I've got this bit of string here that will act as a prop for fishing line. So when I put my bit of foam on my line, it's going to be my depth indicator. So I'll set this at whatever depth I want my mud-eyes to be suspended in the water column. So here on Lake Wendouree, I preferably like to fish around about 2 or 3 feet, so which is somewhere around that distance. So what I do is I grab my bit of foam, I grab my bit of line, which is around about that 2 kilos. In my foam I have a little bit of a slit cut through it, and then I pop the line through it 2 or 3 times. Okay, so what that does then is actually your mud-eye is then suspended 2 or 3 feet below the surface. Now this can be varied in lots of different waters that you fish. So if you went to fish a deeper lake or a deeper river, you would then adjust your mud-eye to fish at a different depth, so which would mean that your foam would be at a different depth. If you fished out of a boat and you fished very deep lakes, something like down around Camperdown, where at Lake Bullamary you could fish a mud-eye somewhere between 15 and 20 feet down, this is still what holds your mud-eye at that depth. Now with the way that we do have the bit of foam set up, and especially when it comes into play when you're actually fishing out of a boat, is that when you actually strike the fish, after you see the mud-eye or your little bit of foam bobbing up and down or disappearing, now remember that you want your bait to be as natural as it possibly can. Now I use as small a piece of foam as I possibly can. We're only using this bit here as a prop, okay? Because I want to be thinking like a fish. I come along, I see this mud eye, and I grab it, and all of a sudden there's no restriction. I'll pull my little bit of foam under. If I was to pull something big like this, it doesn't feel natural to me, and if I was a trout, I'd just swim off and say, hey, that's not normal. So that's what I'll do. So remember to keep your bits of foam as small as possible. Back to with the foam, when you're actually fishing deeper lakes or deeper mud eye, fishing a lot deeper, when we actually strike the fish, the mud eye and the foam will actually disappear, will break through and disappear like that. So your bubble float then gives you free rein down to where your split shot would be. It's pretty hard when fishing out of a boat or fishing off rocks or something like that to try and net a leader or the depth that you've been fishing your mud eye at when it's been around 15 to 20 foot. It's very, very hard. That's why the foam breaks off and your bubble float runs straight down, and you have easy access to net your fish. So that's a couple of pointers that are very, very valuable when fishing mud eye for trout. And one other very important part that I'd like to make when I'm fishing with mud eyes for trout is I use this stuff here. It's called mucilin, which is a line grease. It's actually a flotation device. So what I'm doing with this, I've got a little pad, I pop some flotation stuff on it, and I run it over my line after the depth you want to fish. So after your little bit of foam, I run it 20, 30, 40, 50 metres out, and then to make sure that that line floats. Because if your line doesn't float, your mud eye, after you've cast it out to wherever you've landed in the spot in the water, your line will sink, and that's the only spot that your mud eye will cover. So you've got to wait for a trout to come along to one little spot, and that's it. But when your line floats, it covers lots and lots of area of water. So it gives you a greater opportunity for that mud eye to drift past a feeding trout and give you the best opportunity to catch a trout on mud eye. So very, very important to grab that, some mucilin or some line grease from your local tackle shop, and have that in your kit when you head out and fish mud eye. The next method I'd like to go to enable you to try and catch a trout is to fish with a soft plastic or a hard-bodied lure. So you can actually go and, I use a different rod and reel when it comes to fishing for trout with lures or soft plastics, but you can use your original setup that we went to the tackle shop and purchased to fish with your bait. Just need to change a few things up. So you'd get rid of your sinker, you'd get rid of your swivel, and obviously you'd get rid of your hook, and you'd grab a lure. So there's lots and lots of lures when you go into your tackle shop. My suggestion is you talk to your sales representative at the tackle shop and say, look, I'm going fishing at Lake Wendouree this weekend as an example. What lures do you recommend to use at Lake Wendouree? And hopefully those people do have a knowledge of what is going on at Lake Wendouree, or you could have a look at social media, and that could be an idea of giving some ideas of what lures are actually working at that particular place. But in this case, we're just going to go through what I do here on Lake Wendouree and most other places when I go fishing with lures or soft plastic. So I have my rod, which is once again is about a 2 to 4 kilo setup, a light spinning reel, okay, and I'm actually using braid line instead of monofilament. I won't go into detail what's the difference between braid and monofilament, but what I will say is I use my braid. I do use a monofilament leader. So the leader is a section of normal monofilament or fishing line that comes off your braid onto where you would have your lure. And on the end of my leader, which is somewhere around about the 2 kilo mark, I have a swivel, which then enables me to swap and change lures or soft plastics, whichever I choose to use at that particular time. So, as I mentioned, you can go into your tackle shop, there's lots and lots of lures to use. They all range at different prices, but all for different reasons. Okay, some run very shallow in the water, some run very deep in the water, so it's about knowing where you're going to go and what lake you're going to fish or what river you're going to fish, and gaining some expertise from the sales representative at your tackle shop. So just as an example, this is a small hard-bodied lure, a deep diving lure, which probably goes around about 2 metres. I have a surface lure or a subsurface lure. It only goes around about 6 inches underneath the surface. Okay, and then we do have other lures that do go a lot deeper as well, and they could be 2, 3, 4 metres down. So it's just about knowing what water you're going to fish on one particular day, and knowing and understanding what you need to use. So when it comes to soft plastics, they come in a variety of sizes, colours, shapes. For example, different colours there. We have some different ones there that look like a small bait fish. The majority of soft plastics represent small bait fish or crustaceans, or whatever area the fish actually feed on. So soft plastics can come in just the plastic itself, or they can have the jig head or the weight that you need to cast them out with. So you can, as I said, buy them pre-rigged or just as they are. If not, you'll need to buy the jig heads themselves. So just set them up. One of the keys to fishing soft plastics is to make sure the actual plastic is actually straight. So you don't want it bent like that. It just needs to be straight. Because what you want to remember is that, once again, you want to think like that fish. You want to think like that rainbow or brown trout, and he's looking at a small bait fish or a yabby or whatever he's actually targeting or whatever he's eating on that particular day, and you want to make sure that you're representing what he wants to eat. So make sure that you have them nice and straight. Okay, so a couple of points with that. When it comes to actually fishing the lures, whether it be a hard-bodied lure or whether it be the soft plastic, you want to cast your line out, your lure out, and cover lots of area. So don't just keep casting that particular lure into the one spot. So we might start off straight out in front of us, whether it be a river or a lake, and then we'll go to our left and work our way back to where we originally started, and then we'll go to our right. And once again, work our way. We want to cover lots of area, because if you just cast out in front of you, you need to have that fish that actually is feeding in front of you. But if you're covering lots of area, it gives you a greater opportunity to cover once, cover lots more water, but also you might come across where a fish is feeding. And there's nothing in that spot, move up to another spot. And then once again, start in the middle and move to your left or your right, and just keep casting around and cover lots of water when it comes to lure fishing or fishing soft plastics. And the last form of fishing that I like to cover off on is fly fishing, which is one of my favourite forms of fishing, especially because we live here in Ballarat and we have Lake Wendouree, which is a luxury to us, thanks to Victorian fisheries for stocking with lots of rainbow and brown trout, so we're very, very lucky. But fly fishing is a little bit harder, a little bit more complex, and it's probably not something that you want to start off at the start. Start off with your basics, as in your bait fishing, maybe work up to your lure fishing, and then attack fly fishing. So fly fishing, we have our reel, we have our rod, which can be all at different lengths. It can be shorter ones to fish smaller rivers. Lakes, you actually have longer rods, and different lines. Now lines go with the size of the rods that you use, depending on where you're going to fish, whether it's going to be a river or a lake. Okay, and we do not have, unlike with lures and also when we're fishing bait, we don't have any weight, so we need to use the rods and lines that are matched together by the distributors, the manufacturers, so you need to have those all geared up together. Now, fly fishing is, we are actually representing insects and aquatic animals. That's what we're actually representing. So our flies are not like a natural bait, but we're trying to represent a natural bait. So flies are made up of furs, feathers, and lots of other bits of different pieces to make them represent what is actually the trout or redfin, or lots of other species are actually going to eat. So a suggestion when you want to take on, if you want to take on fly fishing, which is very, very rewarding, especially when you can sit out and actually see a trout come up and sip your dry fly off the surface. That's nothing better than to see that. Is to, obviously you can actually go and talk to the guys at the tackle shops, but also you could actually join a club. And that's probably the best way of actually becoming involved in fly fishing. Very rewarding, and as I said, one of my favourite forms of fishing. And from trout, we'll actually move on to catching redfin. Now, for those that we did mention earlier, redfin are a very, very good table fish and highly sought after by many anglers throughout Victoria and other states as well. So once again, I'd go back to, as a setup, I'd go back to my spin stick, the one that's about 2 metres long, with a small spinning reel and 2 to 3 kilo line. Very basic setup. Once again, like what we used for a power bait, is I would use a sinker. I would then have a swivel and also a hook. Now, some of the baits which are different to trout that redfin really, really like they love garden worms. They do actually like to eat mud-eyes, but they also like to eat yabbies and also minnows or galaxiids. So most lakes do have minnows and galaxiids, and if you're able to source those from those particular waters, they're very deadly bait to use when fishing for redfin. But the basic setup, as I mentioned, just a swivel, a sinker, a swivel, and a small leader with a hook, something around the size 10, 8 to use for redfin, and you can then pop a bunch of worms on, which is probably the easiest way. Get mum and dad to go and dig some of them out of the garden, or you can actually go and purchase them from a tackle shop as well. Once again, you can cast your rod out there and basically leave it sit there and hopefully wait for the redfin to come along and bite. Redfin do like to eat other lures and also soft plastics. So once again, you can use your spin stick as you did. Just get rid of your sinker, your swivel and your hook, and pop a lure, something like one of these ones, just a little deep diving lure. Different colours, different shapes, different sizes. Once again, all our lakes and rivers are all different depths, so we need to get our lures or our soft plastics down to where those fish are going to be at, to give you the best opportunity to catch one of those fish. So once again, pop in your tackle shop, talk to the guys behind the counter, and they'll give you a heads up on what you need to buy for that particular lake or river, wherever you're going to be. Once again, for myself, here on Lake Wendouree, if we're going to go and target redfin, I'd use my spin stick. I'll use my normal spinning reel. I do have braid. I do have the leader, which I mentioned before, and then I have my hard-bodied lure. This one's a subsurface lure, which I've used for trout, and is very, very successful to catch redfin on Lake Wendouree. Or we can go and use soft plastics in, once again, different colours, different sizes, different shapes. all at the same time trying to represent what the redfin are going to eat. So this one here is a bit bigger than others, but it has this big tail that when you actually are winding it through the water, it does vibrate around and has a very, very lifelike representation of a minnow or a small galaxiid, okay, which the redfin do eat. So make sure that you have the hook on nice and the soft plastic on nice and straight, and this thing will wobble through the water and it's very, very lifelike. So as I said earlier, that we need to make sure we're representing what the fish are going to eat. So and redfin certainly do love the big paddle tail, the soft plastics out here on Lake Wendouree. If you need any more tips and pointers today on topics that I've discussed of how to try and catch a redfin, or also a rainbow or brown trout, you can pop onto the VFA website, the Victorian Fishing Authority website, which is vfa.vic.gov.au. They have lots of information. Also, they have all the rules and regulations that you need to know when you're heading out to fish one of our local waterways throughout Victoria, or you can also check out your local recreation angling guide. Good luck. I hope you catch a fish out on the water. Catch you soon.